June 4, 1942, Akutan Island Aleutians. The wind howls across the barren volcanic ridge. Snow mixes with sand in a stinging haze that bites at exposed skin. From the cratered slopes above, you can see nothing but gray rock and the restless gray waters of the Bering Sea, rolling and crashing with a cold fury. Out here, the Aleutians feel like the edge of the world, a place where the air itself seems to fight against the living. For a small group of U.S. Navy personnel, it's more than a desolate outpost. It is a site of mystery and unexpected fortune. Lieutenant Commander John Jack Thatch, a tactician known for his work developing aerial combat strategies, squints into the distance. Somewhere among the rocks, half-buried and battered by wind and waves, lies a Mitsubishi A6M0 captured almost by accident during the chaos following the Battle of Midway. The Zero had not survived the larger engagements of Midway intact. Its pilot, Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga, had been part of a strike force against the U.S. carriers. His plane, crippled and uncontrollable, had crashed into the Aleutian waters near Akutan. Most of the world would never know of its fate, but here, on this lonely rock, the Zero rested, largely intact, upside down in a shallow cove. "By God," one sailor muttered, brushing ice and mud from the fuselage. "She's almost perfect." The aircraft's body was remarkably whole. The wings, though scarred, had retained their delicate sweep. The lightweight frame, the careful attention to aerodynamics, and the diminutive profile all whispered of a machine built for one purpose: to dominate the skies with agility rather than brute force. As they worked, the team noted the absence of heavy armor and the minimal weight the designers had allowed. For American engineers, accustomed to planes like the Grumman F-4F Wildcat, sturdy, overbuilt, and armored, this was almost incomprehensible. They could feel the craft's fragility even by touch, yet they also sensed an elegance that promised incredible maneuverability. A small landing party of Navy personnel prepared the Zero for transport. Thick ropes looped around the fuselage. Sleds creaked against the volcanic rock. Lieutenant Commander Thatch traced his fingers along the control surfaces, imagining the plane's movements in the hands of a skilled pilot. He understood then what reports from Midway hinted at. American pilots had faced something they could neither predict nor easily counter. The cold Aleutian wind didn't allow for prolonged contemplation. The Zero had to be moved quickly before storms, tides, or wildlife could damage it further. As the men slid the aircraft onto the sled, a sense of reverence mixed with urgency. Here lay a key to understanding the enemy, a tangible representation of the Japanese engineering philosophy that had so confounded U.S. forces in the Pacific. "Careful now," Thatch called as the sled wobbled over loose rock. "This one could teach us a lot." By nightfall, the Zero was secured for shipment to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, California. The plane's voyage across storm-tossed waters mirrored the tension and hope of the men who had fought Midway, a fragile vessel carrying knowledge that could change the course of air combat in the Pacific. Here, in the howling Aleutian night, one of Japan's most feared aircraft, brought low not by American fire but by the mercy or misfortune of the elements, began its journey into history. July 7, 1942, NAS North Island, San Diego, California. The morning fog clung to the tarmac like a shroud. Sailors and engineers bustled about the hangars, their breath visible in the cool coastal air. The Zero, carefully crated and suspended on a flatbed, rolled into the expansive aircraft bay, its battered fuselage now a silent ambassador of the Pacific War. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch oversaw the transfer personally. His sharp eyes scanned every rivet, every panel, every curve of the aircraft as it emerged from its wooden cocoon. Around him, Navy engineers and flight test crews exchanged quiet, almost reverent glances. This was no ordinary captured plane. It was a near-perfect specimen of Japanese ingenuity, a puzzle that could reveal the secret behind their deadly air tactics. Inside the hangar, the smell of oil, warm metal, and paint mingled with the salty Pacific air seeping through open doors. Mechanics began uncrating the aircraft, carefully preserving its warped but mostly intact wings, the delicate propeller, and the exposed cockpit. The Zero looked fragile, almost unreal. It was as if someone had designed a Predator not for survival against bombs or bullets, but for a deadly ballet in the skies. "Lieutenant," one junior engineer whispered, gesturing at the plane's fuselage. "How could they make something this light without it falling apart under combat?" Thatch shook his head. "That's what we're about to find out." The Zero was cleaned, catalogued, and prepared for a series of controlled tests. Engineers measured the wingspan, inspected the flaps, and examined the engine and intricate Mitsubishi Sakai radial. Its power-to-weight ratio was remarkable. The plane's low mass, combined with its responsive controls, promised agility that American designers could not yet replicate. Flight test pilots were briefed. Lieutenant Eugene "Red" Ladd, a veteran of carrier operations, would be the first to fly a replica built to American standards in comparison. The team watched, tension tight in the air, as the crated Zero was slowly reassembled on the tarmac. Every bolt, every control cable, every sheet of aluminum seemed to defy expectation. How could this frail-looking machine outmaneuver the Wildcats and dauntless dive bombers the U.S. Navy had trained to rely on? By mid-July, the Zero was flight-ready, or as close as the Americans could make it without its original Japanese markings and instruments. The cockpit smelled faintly of oil and metal polish, a strange combination of alien engineering and familiar human craft. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Thatch climbed in for the first preliminary ground runs, the engine's radial heartbeat filling the hangar. Outside, the Navy personnel held their collective breath. The first takeoff was cautious. The Zero lifted gently from the runway, its slender wings slicing through the morning mist. Thatch guided it into gentle turns, gradually increasing bank angles, speed, and altitude. And then, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, the plane twisted, rolled, and pivoted with a precision that seemed almost impossible. The engineers watched with wide eyes. Datasheets filled with numbers could not capture what they saw in that cockpit, a machine that seemed alive, responsive, and cunning, dancing on invisible strings of aerodynamics. Where the Wildcat felt ponderous and armored, the Zero felt like silk on the wind. After several passes, Thatch returned to the tarmac, cheeks flushed with exertion, a mix of awe and disbelief in his eyes. "It handles like nothing we've ever seen," he muttered. "Tighter, faster, and lighter. It's unreal." The hangar fell silent. The realization had set in. The Zero's extraordinary maneuverability was no accident. Its designers had made deliberate choices, sacrificing armor and durability for agility. In a dogfight that meant life or death, and in many cases, it meant death for the American pilots who had underestimated it. Over the next weeks, engineers dismantled and measured every component. Aluminum alloys, spars, ailerons, rudders, all meticulously recorded. Comparative flights were run in American aircraft, and time and again the Zero's nimbleness dominated. The U.S. Navy struggled to develop tactics that could counter it without risking pilot lives. It became clear that understanding this plane was not just an academic exercise. It was a strategic necessity. Every test flight added pieces to the puzzle. Engineers debated how Japanese designers had achieved such performance without catastrophic failures in combat. Notes on weight distribution, control sensitivity, and engine efficiency were compiled. Flight logs were filled with descriptions that bordered on poetic. "She turns on a dime. Controls respond like thought. A feathered predator in the sky." This was the moment when the Zero transformed from enemy aircraft to teacher. The U.S. Navy's engineers realized that replicating its capabilities would require rethinking the very principles of American fighter design, a lesson in restraint, precision, and calculated risk. For the first time, the tide of aerial tactics in the Pacific began to shift not through guns or bombs, but through knowledge gained from a downed adversary. The hangar at Nassau North Island was silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of calipers and the low hum of generators. Engineers huddled around the partially disassembled Zero, their faces illuminated by harsh overhead lights that reflected off the aircraft's pale green fuselage. Every panel, every wire, every instrument was measured, weighed, and catalogued. It was painstaking work, each detail recorded in meticulous notebooks with ink-stained fingers. Lieutenant Commander Thatch watched as Chief Aviation Machinist's mate Charles "Chuck" Harris examined the ailerons. "Look at this, just a fraction of an inch difference from left to right," Harris muttered, shaking his head. "This is precision. Nothing like our Wildcats." The Saka engine sat on a stand nearby, its radial cylinders exposed like the beating heart of the aircraft. Mechanics had removed every component for inspection, marveling at the balance between lightweight design and reliability. The Zero's airframe, stripped of excess metal, made it almost seem fragile, yet somehow, every joint, every strut, every spar had been engineered to withstand astonishing aerial stress. "It's all about weight," Thatch explained to a junior engineer hovering over the notes. "Every ounce saved goes straight into performance. Maneuverability, climb rate, turning radius, they trade armor for agility. Americans haven't done this yet, not on a fighter this size." Test flights continued, each revealing more secrets. Pilots reported how the Zero could sustain tight turns at speeds that would have caused other aircraft to stall. Its roll rate, pitch response, and ability to climb sharply while maintaining control stunned even the most experienced U.S. aviators. Data sheets quantified performance, but the numbers alone could not capture the visceral understanding of flying the aircraft. Every loop, every evasive maneuver felt like learning a new language in midair. On July 14th, Lieutenant Eugene Ladd attempted a simulated dogfight with a Wildcat. The two aircraft danced over the Southern California coastline, engines screaming, propellers slicing through the early morning mist. Ladd pushed the Wildcat to its limits, banking hard, diving, and trying to outmaneuver the Zero. Each maneuver revealed the stark difference. The Wildcat was solid and dependable, a flying tank. But the Zero feather light, nimble, responsive evaded and twisted with an ease that made Ladd curse and marvel at the same time. "They can turn inside you without losing speed," Ladd muttered over the radio. "Feels like she's reading your mind," Thatch nodded grimly from the control tower. "That's why our pilots were in trouble at Midway. They didn't expect it." The engineers debated how the Japanese had achieved this balance. The aircraft's lightweight structure came at a price. Minimal armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and limited pilot protection. In combat, a single hit could be fatal. But in the hands of a skilled aviator, the Zero was a predator, exploiting speed and maneuverability rather than brute force. Comparative tests were run against American designs. Wildcats, Hellcats, and Dauntless's planes built for resilience struggled to match the Zero's agility. Pilots who had fought in the Pacific shared first-hand accounts: evasive maneuvers that felt impossible, attacks from unexpected angles, and enemy aircraft that seemed to twist the sky itself to their advantage. Every engineer in the hangar understood the stakes. This was more than academic curiosity. The knowledge gleaned from the Zero would directly influence the survival of American pilots. Strategies were revised, combat manuals updated. New tactics developed, using diving attacks, energy fights, and coordinated squadron maneuvers to exploit the Zero's weaknesses. Still, despite careful study, a troubling realization persisted. Replicating the Zero's performance in a U.S.-built aircraft seemed almost impossible. American designers could either prioritize agility, sacrificing protection, or prioritize survivability and lose maneuverability. The balance the Japanese had achieved seemed elusive, a lesson in risk, efficiency, and precision engineering that American engineers struggled to fully grasp. In one corner of the hangar, a small group of mechanics began constructing a partial copy, the so-called Akutan Zero replica, using measurements and observations from the captured aircraft. Sheet by sheet, wire by wire, the machine took shape not as a fighter to fly into battle, but as a training tool, a means to teach pilots the quirks of their most dangerous adversary. By late July, the Zero had become both mentor and warning. It taught American pilots humility, respect the enemy, understand his machine, and above all, never underestimate what precision engineering could accomplish. Thatch, standing amid the scattered tools and flight logs, understood that these lessons were just beginning to shape the air war over the Pacific. The captured Zero, once a downed enemy aircraft in the frozen Aleutians, had transformed into a weapon of knowledge. And in that transformation lay a subtle but decisive shift in the balance of aerial warfare, a shift that would soon reverberate across the skies from Midway to Guadalcanal. By August 1942, the hangars at Nass North Island had become a quiet war room. Maps littered the tables, flight logs stacked in piles, and pilots gathered in small groups to discuss the implications of what they had learned from the Akutan Zero. Lieutenant Commander Thatch stood at the center, pointing to diagrams showing turning radii, climb rates, and energy retention. Each line and curve told a story of danger and opportunity, of what worked and what did not when facing the Japanese fighter in combat. "We cannot fight the Zero on its terms," Thatch told the assembled pilots. His voice was steady but firm, carrying across the echoing hangar. "It outturns, outclimbs, and outmaneuvers anything we currently fly. If you attempt a head-on turning fight, you will not survive. Understand that. Respect the aircraft, respect the pilot, and fly smart." Pilots, many fresh from the battles over Midway, nodded grimly. The lessons were hard-earned. Reports from surviving crews described dogfights where the Zero seemed to defy physics-tight, impossibly fast turns that left American aircraft struggling to maintain position. The Akutan Zero's measurements explained why. Extreme lightweight construction, carefully balanced controls, and an engine that provided a remarkable power-to-weight ratio. Thatch and his team developed what would become the first formalized tactics against the Zero: dive and zoom maneuvers, utilizing altitude as energy to attack and then disengage, coordinated squadron formations to prevent being isolated, and avoidance of prolonged turning engagements all became standard doctrine. Pilots practiced these strategies relentlessly in the training airspace over North Island, each sortie building muscle memory and situational awareness. The Zero replica became central to this training. Pilots climbed into the cockpit, imagining themselves in the Pacific Theater, pursuing Japanese carriers and facing the deadly opponent they now understood in cold, mechanical terms. Mechanics meticulously adjusted controls to mirror the sensitivities of the original Akutan Zero, ensuring every response in the air was accurate. For the first time, American aviators could experience the danger of the Zero firsthand without the cost of lives lost. "You feel how tight it wants to turn?" Lieutenant Eugene Ladd called out during a simulated engagement. "Feels like it's glued to the sky." "Yes," replied another pilot, gripping the yoke. "But if we dive, gain speed and keep the energy, we can bring it to our fight." Even as the training intensified, engineers continued studying the Zero for design insights. The aluminum used in the wings, the shape of the control surfaces, the meticulous weight savings in every component, they tried to determine which principles could be applied to American designs. The goal was not to copy the Japanese aircraft, but to understand it well enough to counter it, to create pilots who could survive and dominate in the skies. As weeks passed, a quiet transformation occurred. Where fear had once greeted the name Zero, respect replaced it. Pilots were no longer fighting blind against an unpredictable enemy. They had data, experience, and understanding on their side. Every maneuver in training, every practice engagement, reinforced the lessons learned from that frozen Aleutian crash site months earlier. By September, the doctrine was formalized. Training manuals described the Zero's strengths and weaknesses in detail, advising American pilots to never underestimate the plane but to exploit its fragility. Tactics emphasized speed, surprise, and altitude, turning the enemy's advantages into vulnerabilities. Pilots learned to use teamwork and situational awareness as force multipliers, understanding that the Zero's precision could be matched by discipline and strategy rather than raw skill alone. Thach often reminded his trainees, "This is not about imitation. This is about adaptation." The Zero teaches us one thing: the skies favor those who learn faster than the enemy. These lessons would soon prove critical over Guadalcanal and beyond. When Wildcats and Hellcats met Japanese Zeros in the months that followed, pilots executed the dive and zoom tactics, coordinated attacks, and energy-conscious maneuvers first learned against the Akutan replica. Lives were saved, engagements were won. And though the Zero remained a formidable adversary, American forces were no longer at its mercy. The captured Zero had become more than an artifact. It was a teacher, a mentor, and a turning point. From the frozen Aleutians to the warm hangars of North Island, the story of one downed fighter shaped the very tactics of naval aviation in the Pacific War, influencing battles, strategies, and ultimately, the survival of thousands of pilots. October 1942, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The air was thick with heat and humidity, carrying the scent of salt mud and the faint tang of smoke from nearby shelling. Pilots of the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy squadrons were tense but focused, their minds sharp from weeks of training against the Akutan Zero replica. Every pre-flight ritual, every checklist, every glance at instruments carried the weight of life-and-death decisions learned back at North Island. Lieutenant Eugene Ladd sat in the cockpit of his F-4F Wildcat, glancing across the field at his fellow pilots. Engines roared in unison, propellers spinning like restless predators. The Pacific sun glinted off the olive-drab fuselages, highlighting scratches, dents, and the evidence of previous combat. Here, the lessons learned from a downed Zero in the Aleutians would finally be tested against the enemy in the skies. The first warning came from the radar picket, incoming Japanese aircraft approaching from the northwest. Red and blue markers flashed across the small radar screens, and the ground crews shouted last-minute warnings and directions. Ladd's heart thumped in rhythm with the Wildcat's engine. This was the moment the Akutan Zero had been training them for. "Remember your training." Thach's voice echoed in the back of his mind. "Dive and zoom. Don't turn with them. Keep your energy." As the Japanese formation drew closer, the distinctive silhouette of the Mitsubishi A6M0 appeared above the clouds. Sleek, deadly, and familiar from diagrams and simulations, it seemed to mock the Wildcats with its effortless grace. But the Americans had prepared. They had studied every control surface, every weight-saving trick, every subtle advantage of this aircraft. Lieutenant Ladd led his section in a coordinated climb, gaining altitude to retain energy for diving attacks. The Zero formation reacted predictably, attempting to lure the Wildcats into turning fights. But Ladd held steady, diving sharply at a calculated angle, guns blazing. The Zeros twisted in response, but the Wildcats used the energy tactics drilled for weeks, diving away before becoming easy targets. The first engagement was brief but telling. 1-0, attempting to turn inside a Wildcat, overextended. Ladd's wingman, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Andrews, capitalized, firing from a higher position and scoring hits on the enemy aircraft. Another Wildcat pilot executed a textbook zoom climb, forcing 2 Zeros to break off the attack. their speed and maneuverability rendered ineffective against disciplined, energy-conscious tactics. By the end of the day, the impact of Akutan Zero training was undeniable. American pilots had engaged superior enemy aircraft and survived, their understanding of maneuvering, speed, and positioning paying dividends. Reports sent back to headquarters describe how dive and zoom tactics, combined with coordinated squadron behavior, allowed pilots to exploit the Zero's weaknesses while avoiding its strengths. "This is what North Island taught us," Ladd said quietly as he climbed out of his cockpit, sweat and grime streaking his face. "They think they can outturn us. But we can outthink them." Over the following weeks, these tactics became standard across Guadalcanal and other Pacific engagements. Pilots who had trained on the Akutan replica reported consistently higher survival rates and more successful engagements. Against Japanese Zeros, engineers continued refining the knowledge gained from the captured aircraft, feeding updates to pilots and squadron leaders in near real time. The Zero's presence, once a terrifying unknown, had shifted. It was no longer an unstoppable predator but a known adversary whose characteristics could be anticipated, countered, and under the right circumstances exploited. Each encounter in the skies validated the painstaking study, the careful measurement, and the disciplined application of tactics developed from one downed aircraft in the Aleutians. By late 1942, the influence of the Akutan Zero was clear. The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps had turned what had been a mystery into a tool for survival, turning fear into knowledge and knowledge into a decisive advantage. Pilots who had once struggled against the unpredictable movements of the Zero now approached engagements with calculated confidence, fully aware that training, preparation, and understanding could neutralize even the most legendary adversary in the Pacific theater. Back at NAS North Island, the hum of machinery and the clatter of tools never ceased. Engineers pored over the data collected from the Akutan Zero, each flight test and every cockpit observation feeding into design meetings and technical briefs. The lessons were clear. Agility came from weight reduction, precise aerodynamics, and responsive controls, but these came at the cost of pilot protection and survivability. Finding a balance would define the next generation of American fighters. Chief Engineer Edgar Smith stood over a table covered with aluminum sheets, spars, and detailed schematics. "We can't just copy them," he said, rubbing a grease-stained hand across his brow. "If we lighten our planes like this, pilots won't survive a single hit. But we can learn how to maximize maneuverability without sacrificing too much armor." The team focused on several key areas. Wing design and aileron responsiveness were analyzed to improve roll rates. Engine performance was studied for better climb rates without overtaxing the airframe. Weight distribution, control sensitivity, and materials all became the focus of intense engineering scrutiny. Every adjustment was meticulously calculated, drawing on the Zero's advantages while adhering to American priorities: protection, firepower, and durability. In October 1942, design meetings led to concrete changes. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, which would soon enter production, incorporated lessons from the Zero. Its airframe was slightly lighter than previous Wildcats, its engine tuned for a high power-to-weight ratio, and the aerodynamics refined to improve turn performance. Unlike the Zero, however, the Hellcat maintained heavy armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, giving pilots a fighting chance in prolonged engagements. Lieutenant Commander Thatch continued to consult on design and tactics, bridging the gap between engineering data and operational needs. "We can't make a Japanese plane," he told the engineers, "but we can make a plane that beats it, if we understand it better than they do." By the spring of 1943, the fruits of these lessons were evident in the Pacific. Wildcats and Hellcats, flown by pilots trained against the Akutan Zero replica, engaged Japanese aircraft with confidence. Tactical doctrine emphasized energy management, coordinated attacks, and hit-and-run maneuvers. Pilots reported that they could now dictate the terms of engagement, no longer forced to react helplessly to the Zero's acrobatics. The study of the Akutan Zero also influenced cockpit ergonomics and control sensitivity. Pilots noted how the Japanese design allowed instinctive responses to maneuvers. American engineers adjusted control linkages, stick forces, and rudder ratios to provide similar responsiveness, ensuring that pilots could execute precise maneuvers without excessive strain. By late 1943, the cumulative impact was undeniable. In the Solomon Islands, naval aviation reports highlighted significant improvements in kill ratios, survivability, and operational efficiency. Pilots credited not only their training but also the engineering lessons gleaned from a single downed aircraft on a remote Aleutian island. The Zero, once a feared predator, had become a teacher that reshaped American fighter design and combat strategy. Meanwhile, the Akutan Zero itself remained preserved at North Island, a testament to the value of captured intelligence. Mechanics polished its fuselage, catalogued its parts, and recorded every flight characteristic. For the men who had recovered it, the aircraft symbolized the intersection of ingenuity and adaptability, a physical embodiment of the lessons that had saved lives and turned the tide of air combat. As the Pacific War continued, the ripple effect of the Zero's capture extended beyond Guadalcanal. Engineers and pilots alike carried its lessons into every theater where American aircraft faced the Japanese. The delicate balance of performance and protection, agility and durability, became a guiding principle in U.S. fighter development, a principle first revealed through the chance discovery of a single frozen fighter in the Aleutians. The Akuten-0 had transformed from wreckage into a tool of survival, its legacy etched not in destruction but in the lives it helped preserve, the tactics it informed, and the machines it inspired. From a solitary crash on a remote island, it reshaped the skies of the Pacific and left an indelible mark on the course of the war. By 1944, the impact of the Akuten-0 was visible across the Pacific theater. Pilots trained against the replica flew with an instinctive understanding of what the Japanese fighter could and could not do. Dive and zoom tactics were second nature, squadron coordination flawless, and energy management instinctive. The Zero, once a symbol of near invincibility, had been demystified. Its lessons lived not just in manuals, but in every maneuver executed above the Coral Islands and endless blue of the Pacific. At Pearl Harbor, Thatch lectured new pilots on the importance of understanding enemy capabilities. The Zero was brilliant, he said, eyes scanning the young aviators. But brilliance alone does not win battles. Knowledge wins battles. Study it, anticipate it, and then outfight it. Pilots listened intently, some taking notes, others staring at diagrams of turning radii and climb rates. They were the inheritors of lessons learned from a single crashed fighter thousands of miles away. Meanwhile, in engineering workshops, the ripple effects continued. The lessons of the Zero informed refinements in the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, aircraft that would dominate Pacific skies in the latter half of the war. Designers experimented with weight distribution, control sensitivity, and aerodynamic surfaces, all while maintaining the ruggedness necessary for survivability. American aircraft were no longer slow to react. They became instruments of precision, marrying firepower with maneuverability in ways that mirrored and ultimately surpassed the Zero's capabilities. The Akuten-0 also influenced intelligence practices. Naval intelligence officers recognized the enormous value in studying captured enemy equipment. From small arms to armored vehicles, the principle was the same. Understanding the enemy's design, tactics, and weaknesses could save lives and shape strategy. The Zero had become a case study in how material analysis could turn the tide of conflict, a lesson repeated in every theater of war thereafter. Surviving pilots who had faced Japanese Zeros in combat often reflected on the change in their fortunes. Lieutenant James Andrews, in a post-war oral history, recalled the first dogfight after training on the Akuten replica. It was like someone had taken the mask off, he said. We knew what it could do, we knew where it couldn't go, and suddenly we weren't scared anymore. That knowledge saved lives. More than one life. The aircraft itself remained preserved at North Island, a tangible relic of both tragedy and opportunity. Visitors, from pilots to engineers to historians, marveled at its sleek design and delicate construction. It was more than a plane. It was a teacher, a symbol of adaptability, and a reminder that even in war, understanding the enemy could be as decisive as firepower. Historian accounts later emphasized its significance. The Akuten-0 was credited with shaping the very nature of U.S. aerial tactics and design philosophy in the Pacific War. It highlighted the importance of agility over brute strength, strategy over instinct, and preparation over reaction. From Guadalcanal to the Marianas, the echoes of its lessons influenced engagements, often tipping the balance in favor of the Americans. By war's end, the Zero's legacy was clear. It had transformed from a feared enemy to an invaluable mentor. American fighters became more capable, pilots more confident, and tactics more effective, all because a single plane downed on a remote Aleutian island had survived long enough to reveal its secrets. The story of the Akuten-0 remains a testament to ingenuity, observation, and adaptability. It is a story of how knowledge captured in a frozen cove traveled thousands of miles to change the course of a global conflict, shaping lives, strategies, and machines in ways no single battle could have achieved. In the annals of history, few captured aircraft have had such an enduring impact. In the quiet of the hangar at Nass North Island, the men who had worked on the Akuten-0 often reflected on their experiences. Chief Aviation Machinist, mate Charles Harris remembered the first time he touched the fuselage after it was brought in from Akutan. It felt lighter than it should, he recalled decades later. Like it could almost lift itself off the ground. You knew instantly you were dealing with something different, something alive in a way our planes weren't, Lieutenant Commander Thatch, who had overseen both the testing and the tactical integration of the Zero, often described the experience as a mixture of awe and humility. I had spent years studying aircraft design, he said in an oral history interview, but nothing prepared me for this. It wasn't just about turning radius or climb rate. It was about the philosophy of the plane, the way it was built to fight in the hands of someone who understood it. That's what made it deadly. Pilots who had flown against the Zero in simulated training shared similar memories. Lieutenant Eugene Ladd remembered the first encounter in the replica. You feel every movement through the stick, he said. Every minor adjustment has a reaction. You can't just rely on brute force. You have to think ahead, anticipate, and control it with finesse. It's almost like flying a living thing. Lieutenant James Andrews, reflecting on his combat experiences over Guadalcanal, spoke of the difference it made in real dogfights. I knew what to expect from them, he explained. The first time we took off after training on the Akutan replica, I had confidence I'd never had before. I could anticipate their turns, predict their energy, and use it against them. That knowledge, that was life-saving. Even among the engineers, there was a deep sense of connection to the aircraft. Edgar Smith, one of the lead designers who had incorporated lessons from the Zero into the Hellcat, described it as the ultimate teacher. For him, the work was both technical and personal. We were learning from a machine that was built to kill us. And yet, it was the very thing that gave our pilots a fighting chance. That contradiction stayed with me. There were also moments of somber reflection. The Zero represented the cost of war. Skilled pilots, like Tadayoshi Koga, who had flown with precision and courage, were gone, leaving only their machines behind. The engineers and pilots recognized that every advantage gained from studying the Zero came at a human price. A sobering reminder that the lessons of war were written in lives as well as metal and rivets. Many of these personal accounts were preserved in letters, interviews, and oral histories. They described the sense of wonder, respect, and cautious admiration that the Akutan Zero inspired. It was not just a captured aircraft. It was a bridge between adversaries, a tangible lesson in how ingenuity and dedication could shape the outcomes of battles and the experiences of those who fought. As the war progressed, these human experiences, the awe of discovery, the discipline of training, and the humility before an enemy's skill became as much a part of the Akutan Zero's story as its engineering lessons. Pilots and engineers alike carried these memories forward, passing them on to new generations of aviators and designers, ensuring that the impact of a single downed aircraft would resonate long after the Pacific battles had ended. By early 1943, the influence of the Akutan Zero extended far beyond individual pilots or isolated squadrons. Naval strategists began to recognize a pattern. The knowledge gained from studying the captured aircraft directly informed planning, operations, and engagement strategies across the Pacific theater. Every new mission incorporated lessons derived from that single downed fighter in the Aleutians. Carrier task forces revised their deployment protocols. Commanders insisted on coordinated fighter screens, energy-conscious engagement patterns, and altitude management tall tactics, inspired by the Zero's known strengths and weaknesses. Admiral William F. Halsey, reviewing after-action reports from the Solomon Islands, noted a marked improvement in kill ratios and survivability among U.S. aviators. Intelligence officers credited the rigorous study of captured aircraft, particularly the Akutan Zero, with providing the practical knowledge necessary to gain the upper hand in air engagements. Understanding your enemy, Halsey remarked in a staff meeting, is as crucial as your ordnance. We've learned what the Zero can do. Now we can dictate the fight rather than react to it. On the front lines, pilots like Ladd and Andrews saw these changes manifest in real time. Coordinated squadron tactics meant fewer pilots were isolated and vulnerable to aggressive enemy maneuvers. Dive and zoom strategies, first practiced in simulated combat against the Zero replica, became standard doctrine. Squadron leaders drilled these tactics relentlessly, teaching aviators to exploit altitude and speed advantages and avoid prolonged turning engagements where the Zero excelled. Intelligence reports circulated that Japanese pilots were surprised by the Americans' adaptation. Where once the Zero's agility and surprise had been decisive, now American forces could anticipate moves, counter aggressively, and disengage when necessary. The Akutan Zero, though no longer in combat, had become a ghostly presence in every Pacific air battle, its design, movements, and limitations understood and weaponized against its creators. Engineering continued to reinforce strategy. Aircraft such as the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, developed with insights gleaned from the Zero, delivered the precise combination of speed, maneuverability, and survivability required to execute the new tactics. The synergy between pilot training and engineering refinement created a multiplier effect. The lessons of one aircraft, amplified across squadrons, carriers, and entire task forces. Naval officers also noted the psychological impact. Pilots who had trained against the Aku-10 reported a newfound confidence in combat, reducing hesitation and improving decision-making under fire. Knowing the enemy's capabilities and their limits allowed them to act decisively, often dictating the engagement rather than reacting defensively. This confidence translated directly into mission success, aircraft preservation, and pilot survival. The strategic effect rippled beyond Guadalcanal. Carrier task forces operating in the Central Pacific incorporated the Zero's lessons into operational planning, from patrol patterns to interception tactics. Commanders could now deploy forces with a clear understanding of what to expect from Japanese fighters, minimizing losses and maximizing offensive potential. In essence, a single downed aircraft had reshaped the tactical landscape of the Pacific Air War. Historians would later emphasize the broader significance. The Aku-10 was not simply a captured plane. It was a catalyst for a shift in the balance of air power. The combination of tactical innovation, pilot training, and engineering insight enabled the U.S. Navy to turn the previously dominant Japanese fighter into a manageable threat. The lessons learned from its fragile yet deadly design informed doctrine, aircraft development, and operational decisions that would ultimately contribute to the Allied victory in the Pacific. Even in the planning rooms far from the front lines, the Zero's legacy was evident. Maps, charts, and reports carried its imprint. Strategic decisions from the timing of carrier strikes to the positioning of fighter screens reflected a deep understanding of the enemy aircraft's capabilities. The plane that had crashed on a remote, Aleutian Island months earlier was now shaping the very course of the war across thousands of miles of ocean. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had entered a new phase. U.S. naval aviation was no longer reacting to the formidable Japanese Zero, it was dictating the terms of engagement. The lessons learned from the Aku-10 had permeated every level of air operations, from the cockpit to the design bureau to the strategic command rooms of the Pacific Fleet. And NS North Island, the preserved Zero, had taken on a near-mythical status. Pilots, engineers, and officers would pause to study it, tracing the lines of its delicate fuselage and contemplating the design choices that had made it such a deadly adversary. "It's a masterclass in efficiency," Lieutenant Commander Thatch said during one inspection, gesturing to the aircraft. "Every ounce saved, every movement calculated, it's ruthless in the sky. And now we've learned how to survive it." The engineering teams, inspired by the Zero's simplicity and precision, continued refining American aircraft. Lessons in weight optimization, control sensitivity, and aerodynamic efficiency influenced not just the Hellcat and Corsair, but also later designs such as the F-8F Bearcat. Engineers strove to create fighters that could combine agility with survivability, a balance that had eluded the Japanese engineers, but which American innovation could achieve through careful study and incremental improvement. Pilots, meanwhile, carried the Zero's lessons into every engagement. Veterans of Guadalcanal and the Central Pacific shared stories of how dive and zoom maneuvers, energy management, and squadron coordination consistently allowed them to outfight enemy aircraft that had once seemed unbeatable. For many, the Aku-10 was less an enemy and more a teacher whose lessons had been written in the skies over the Pacific. "I never thought a single crashed plane could teach us so much," said Lieutenant James Andrews in a post-war reflection. "It changed how we flew, how we fought, how we survived. We respected it, and in respecting it, we learned how to beat it." The human impact of the Aku-10 extended beyond tactics and engineering. It fostered a culture of observation, analysis, and adaptation within naval aviation. Pilots were encouraged to study the enemy, to think critically about their machines and their own capabilities, and to apply knowledge rather than rely solely on instinct or courage. In many ways, the Zero instilled a mindset that would serve American aviators well long after the Pacific War ended. The captured aircraft's influence even reached training doctrine. Newly commissioned pilots were briefed extensively on the Zero's characteristics, ensuring that the lessons learned in Alaska and California were passed to every generation of aviators. It became a cornerstone of American fighter training: understand your adversary, anticipate its moves, and fight smart. Lives were saved, missions succeeded, and confidence replaced fear in the skies where the Zero once reigned supreme. As the war drew closer to its conclusion, the Zero's legacy was undeniable. Aircraft like the Hellcat and Corsair, flown by well-trained and strategically informed pilots, dominated the Pacific. The initial mystique and terror associated with the Zero were replaced by respect tempered with knowledge. The downed fighter that had once been a deadly threat had, through careful study, transformed into an enduring advantage for the U.S. Navy. Historians looking back often highlight the Akuten Zero as a rare example of how intelligence gathered from a single enemy asset can have an outsized impact on both technology and strategy. Its story is a testament to the power of observation, analysis, and adaptation in wartime, a reminder that innovation is often born from understanding the strengths and weaknesses of those you face. In the final analysis, the Akuten Zero did more than inform tactics or inspire design changes. It reshaped the mindset of U.S. naval aviation, turning fear into strategy, chaos into disciplined action, and a single captured aircraft into a tool that helped secure victory in the Pacific. Its legacy endured in the planes, the pilots, and the victories that followed, an enduring testament to the transformative power of knowledge captured from the enemy. When the war ended in 1945, the Akuten Zero remained preserved at NS North Island, a silent witness to the unfolding history it had influenced. Unlike the planes that had roared across the skies and returned battered from combat, this aircraft had never flown into battle, yet its impact had been profound. Engineers, pilots, and historians alike regarded it not as a trophy, but as a teacher whose lessons had reverberated across the Pacific theater. Lieutenant Commander Thatch, now a decorated officer with multiple aerial victories to his name, often visited the hangar in the post-war years. Standing before the Zero, he reflected on how a single aircraft had reshaped naval aviation. It wasn't just a plane, he said in an oral history interview. It was a problem, a puzzle, and a mentor all at once. From its fragile frame, we learned how to build better planes, train smarter pilots, and fight more effectively. That's a legacy few aircraft can claim. Many of the pilots who had trained against the Akuten Zero went on to share its lessons with the next generation of aviators. Oral histories, lectures, and debriefs preserved the knowledge for decades. The Zero's influence extended beyond World War II, informing post-war fighter design and aerial tactics. Engineers continued to study its construction and performance characteristics, citing it as an example of what precision and efficiency could achieve even in a design that sacrificed survivability. For those who had recovered it on Akuten Island, the memory of the frozen Aleutians and the hazardous retrieval operation remained vivid. Chief Machinist's mate Charles Harris recounted the difficulty of hauling the plane from the rugged, icy terrain, noting how every step required ingenuity and care. The effort had been dangerous, but the rewards insights that saved countless lives in combat made the risk worthwhile. Museums would later display the Akuten Zero as a tangible link to both the Pacific War and the broader history of military aviation. Visitors marveled at its lightweight frame, delicate controls, and the stark contrast between its fragility and lethality. Interpretive materials emphasized not only its technical features but also the story of its discovery, recovery, and transformative impact on U.S. tactics and aircraft development. The Zero became emblematic of a rare convergence. A single machine, captured under extraordinary circumstances, shaping the course of a global conflict. Historians, too, have reflected on the aircraft's unique place in history. Some called it a turning point in naval aviation intelligence, others a case study in applied engineering. But nearly all agreed on one point. The Zero demonstrated the outsized impact of knowledge when harnessed effectively. A single downed fighter on a remote island had informed strategies, preserved lives, and accelerated technological progress in ways that combat alone could not. The legacy of the Akuten Zero endures in more subtle ways. Modern naval aviation continues to emphasize the importance of understanding enemy capabilities, applying intelligence rigorously, and integrating lessons learned into training, tactics, and design. Its story serves as a reminder that victory is often as much about observation, adaptation, and learning as it is about raw firepower. Today, historians and aviation enthusiasts recall the Akuten Zero not just for its technical features, but for the story of its journey from a downed enemy fighter to a carefully studied artifact to a teacher of tactics and design that shaped the air war in the Pacific. It is remembered as a pivotal, almost miraculous event, a frozen plane in the Aleutians that changed the course of naval aviation and the fate of thousands of pilots. Its wings may have never taken it into combat again, but its influence soared far beyond the Aleutians, leaving a legacy that would outlive the war, the men who flew against it, and even the pilots who would later train with its lessons in mind.